choices and that sort of stuff. And, when it comes to training, like you kind of mentioned, like making it fun and making the sport fun so we don't all burn out by the time we're 18 and that sort of stuff, and they have that opportunity to keep playing. And then just giving them, that, you're an open ear, really. So they have questions about nutrition. You don't say things are good or bad, like you're open, or reach out to someone, a sports dietitian, or send me a DM or something like that, and just open that conversation up, because that's really what it's about. It's just communicating in a positive way. And that's
You are listening to the Bridging Impact Podcast, transforming leaders on and off the court with host Coach Furtado. Without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, Stephanie, and welcome to the Bridging Impact Podcast. I am thrilled to have you on today to talk about nutrition, which I feel like is incredibly important, not only for athletes, but for coaches and parents that are listening and, all humans. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. We always ask, the super simple question, not a little softball, right? How have sports made an impact on your life?
Yeah, sports have been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I think one of my first memories, like I started playing soccer at like 3 or 4 years old, and pee-wee soccer, and everyone starts young. And I remember I didn't want to finish the season. I didn't want to do it. And my dad, being the coach, looked at me and he's like, "You can't quit on your team that's counting on you. You cannot quit something halfway through the season. You have to stick it out." And then, here it is 30 plus years later, still playing, loving the sport. And it was a big, I would say, in terms of the athletic, it was just a big learning lesson very early on that, this team is your family. It's your friends. It's how you learn leadership and communication. And it brought me to my career, being in the sports world. So I would say sports have had a huge impact on my life, just in terms of, learning those leadership and communication and team, community sense. But also I've met some of my closest best friends through sports and athletics.
Right. And before we dive into your career as a nutritionist, I'd love to kind of expand a little bit more on the topic that you just said, because I actually had a similar experience. Like I wanted to quit baseball when I was around 12 years old, and then, ended up having a great high school career. And I'm glad that I had a conversation with my dad, and he kind of just encouraged me to, continue playing. And I'm curious how that experience of your dad, encouraging you to be accountable to your team and stick it out, and helped you really find, kind of your friends and your pathway along as a young person.
Yeah, it was definitely something that always stuck with me. And like my dad, it was, I feel like dads always pull these sayings out of nowhere. And,
Right.
he would always say, like, can't isn't an option. Like can't is just something that you haven't tried yet. So it's never, I can't do this, or you can't do that. It's just, you haven't tried it yet. You can, it maybe take a little bit of work, a little bit of effort. So definitely just kind of laying that foundation for just being a stronger human. And it's something that I work on with a lot of my clients all the time is, yes, we talk about nutrition, but I want you to be a well-rounded, strong human as well. So like mentally, physically, sleep, nutrition, your recovery, all of that comes back to just your overall health and well-being. And so definitely something I integrate into my client work, but really impacted me from a young age.
Right. Yeah, you talked about the holistic aspects of just being a healthy individual, a healthy person, whether you're an athlete or, a parent or coach. So with that, what made you want to specifically kind of go down the
Oops, are you
pursuit
there?
of nutrition versus, maybe focusing a little bit more on the mental side of the game? Because all of it's important, but, at a certain point we have to eventually kind of figure out, oh, this is a little bit of my niche. So what spoke to you about nutrition?
Yeah, so it was something where, everybody eats all the time. And even, I played soccer growing up, and that was, soccer and track were kind of my two sports of choice, soccer being the primary one. And as I got more and more competitive, I myself thought I was eating healthy. You eat the salads and all this and the proteins, and it just wasn't enough. And I was falling behind energy wise, muscle wise, growth and development wise. And then you realize, like, okay, something's going on. And I had a couple of broken bones and was delayed in growth. And my doctor's like, we've got to take a deeper dive into what's going on. And that's when I found the world of nutrition and athletics and how they really intersect, because everybody eats and you think you eat enough, but athletes need an extraordinary amount of fuel and protein and carbs and fats throughout the day. And then you add on top of that, especially with my clients when they're in middle school, high school, college, they're still growing and developing into those adult bodies. You need a significant more, like you have to feel the human body too on top of your training. So there's a lot of energy that goes into just helping athletes build. And it's something I realized pretty early on how powerful that impact nutrition can have.
Right. And you kind of touched on the earlier point of, thinking about, oh, I'm just going to eat some greens, being, salads, and then maybe some
Yeah.
protein bars. But as you kind of, I'm sure, have done more research and learn more about nutrition, there's a lot more to it. You're talking about the significant fuel that is required. For those that are listening, I know, you have different clients, and every client is going to, or every athlete, or really every person is going to have their own individual tailored needs. But what are some good common thread principles for athletes to fuel their bodies to make sure that they are, supporting the amount of energy that they're exerting in practice and in trainings and in games?
Yeah. So, two foundational principles I look at with every athlete is what you're eating and when you're eating it. So, I have my coaching method, it's the 4 fuel method. And so, the first 2 pillars are fuel, so the what you eat, and the finesse, the timing of what you're eating. And so, making sure you're eating enough is really key there. So, it's not eating a ton of fruits and vegetables. It's really honing in on carbohydrates as the foundation to your fueling plan. And that's what I recommend all athletes do, really making carbs that foundation of what you're eating. So the rice, the pasta, the cereals, the oatmeals, bagels, those sorts of things. And then you're adding in strong proteins, whether it's from yogurt or nuts and seeds, fish, chicken, steak. And then after that, you focus on the fruits and vegetables when you have room in your stomach and in your plate. Because, this, I always say that this isn't a dietitian telling you not to eat your vegetables.
No.
But if you have to prioritize 2 things on your plate, those carbs and protein should definitely be the priority for athletes. And then it comes down to the timing. So a big mistake I see and I hear a lot and heard earlier today from a couple athletes
Yeah.
is, I can't eat before practice because my stomach hurts or I get cramps. And I have to say, well, what are you eating? Can we look at the types of food you're choosing? Because the closer you get to practice, that timing, that finesse piece really matters. We want simple, easy to digest fuel. And that would just be mostly simple carbohydrates. So we're thinking things that are low in fiber, low in protein, and can easily be digested by your body. So I love things like cereal or granola bars or even applesauce are great choices.
Interesting. So b- before we dive into the when, I'd love to kind of go back to, the what, like what we are eating. And it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting that you talked about like carbs and proteins. And I feel like obviously there is definitely a trend towards like the keto diet, right? Of high protein, high
Yeah.
fat, and like cutting out carbs. But can you expand on the importance of carbohydrates for athletes?
Yeah, carbs need to be the foundation because it's the primary workhorse or fuel source for your muscles. So for them to react quickly, for you to have the endurance, the speed, that agility, carbohydrates are really where all that comes from for your body. On top of that, your brain uses a significant amount of carbohydrates from day to day. So when it comes to most of my athletes, right, we're student athletes, we're thinking middle, high school, collegiate athletes, student athletes, you have to focus in school all day, but then you can't list a sport that doesn't need focus and concentration to thrive. And to have that really powerful reaction time, quick reaction time in team sports, being able to communicate with your teammates all comes down to your brain and having that focus and concentration. So yeah, carbs are really foundational for your brain and your muscles.
That's interesting, and I remember hearing that, but I've heard so much, like I guess anti-carbon. Why do you think,
Yeah.
and like obviously it would just be kind of an opinion in terms of kind of your thoughts, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on why carbs get such a bad rap in terms of like being healthy.
Yeah, I think as a culture, we go through phases when we don't know the answer to something, or if something worked for somebody, it must work for all, right? So, way
Hmm.
back when it was low fat everything, and then it was no sugar, and then it was all, then it was pro eggs and against eggs. And,
Right.
as a culture, we're constantly trying to villainize a certain food. And I think, when it comes to my approach to nutrition, it's all food fits. And it's just that timing and that portion and how it's going to work into your fueling plan strategically so that you're fueled, you're energized, but you're also having fun. I think if you ever feel restricted, hungry as an athlete, I think the worst thing is being around a hungry athlete, right? So if you're hungry all the time, you're not the nicest person, you're restricting, you're not enjoying your favorite foods, like that's not a way to live. You should be fueled, you should be strong, but you should be having fun at the same time. And so I just think culturally, we've got to change that perspective. There's no good or bad foods. It's just the amount you're eating them and how often and what we're looking at in terms of your goals and your fueling strategy.
That's interesting. Yeah, when you talk about goals, like, um, I'm sure you work with quite a bit of different athletes. So I'm going to give you a couple of different athletes. Let's say athlete number one, he wants to lose a little bit of weight before the season. What would his approach be? And then athlete number two wants to, bulk up and get a little bit of muscle. How would those different diet plans, or not diet, but nutrition plans look?
Yeah, it really depends on those individual athletes, and
Right.
I take into consideration, yes, what they're eating, that's a big impact, but also their training schedule and that training load.
Mm,
So the athlete who's trying to, manipulate their body composition, and one, we want to preserve the muscle they have and just change the body fat. And so yeah, we still want to focus on that carb and protein, but maybe we're honing in on some of that color from fruits and vegetables to give them the antioxidants to help them recover and preserve that muscle. And we're just looking at what is that training load, because we still need them to be fueled. I don't want them to be exhausted while they're trying to manipulate that body composition. And on the other side, if we have an athlete who's trying to bulk, it's bulking season, so we're trying to put some muscle on. I don't want that athlete to feel like they're going to pop because they're eating all day, every day. So when it comes to that weight gainer, we look at energy density versus nutrient density. So like energy dense foods have more calories, protein, carbs, and essential fats per bite. So they can get in more energy and not feel like they're just stuffed all the time and hitting the field already stuffed and feeling nauseous and
mm.
uncomfortable. There's nothing worse than that. So it really, yeah, I take into consideration their food preferences, what they're eating, but then that training load is going to be really dependent on that. So that athlete that's trying to lose weight, if they're doing a lot of training but trying to manipulate their body fat, the mistake I see make a lot is they just cut back their calories, but they're still training really hard. So now all that training they're doing is actually just breaking down muscle to energize their training, and they're kind of not helping their overall goal of maintaining and building muscle. That's every athlete's goal. So it's really just really individualized. What we look at, what does that plate look like? What is that nutrient breakdown? And how do we look at the timing of what they're eating too?
Yeah, absolutely. That was going to be my follow-up question, was on timing, in terms of, you brought up an interesting point. You don't want to have something that is super energy dense right before you go to practice. And I know
Yeah.
before, when we talked about our call, when we connected about a month ago, we talked about kind of, eating like 3 meals a day with two snacks. And again, it's probably going to depend on the person and the training load. But when it comes to the win, do you generally, like, you recommend like, oh, a big dinner after, your training, or like a big dinner at lunch before a big game? Like, what are some principles when it comes to your win? And again, I know it's probably nuanced depending on each athlete.
Yeah, yeah. So there's my favorite word is consistency. So if you can be consistent in fueling your body all day long, that's really the goal. Research shows that even when it comes to building muscle, it's so much better to have protein at every meal and every snack rather than having that really big protein packed meal at the end of the day for dinner or say for lunch, right? To spread that protein out gives your body those building blocks of those amino acids throughout the day to continue to build and repair and strengthen that muscle, which is the goal. But when it comes to timing, I have three key pillars. The first is that pre workout meal. Typically, I recommend 3 to 4 hours before training, gives you plenty of time to digest everything. And so that meal is going to have a lot of carbohydrates, some protein, essential fats, and color from fruits and vegetables. 3 or 4 hours is plenty of time for you to digest. Then you have that second pillar. You're 1 to 2 hours out. Maybe you're a little bit hungry still. That's okay. You can still have some fuel, but we want to think about now what we're choosing, because now we're getting closer to practice. We have less time to digest. We want to hone in on mostly carbohydrates with a little bit of protein or carbs. So this could be something like a PB&J, maybe oatmeal with a little bit of peanut butter on top, or cereal and milk. So we still have that carb and protein combo, a little bit smaller of a portion, not quite a big meal, but more carbohydrate based. The third pillar is that hour before practice. This is the supercharged zone, kind of what I call it. It's your chance to really add in and infuse that fuel. It's going to help you be more explosive during practice. And this is that pre-workout snack. Really simple carbohydrates, easy to digest, low fiber, low protein, low fat. Typically, how I recommend athletes remember this is think about what toddlers eat. Toddlers love simple snacks, goldfish, pretzels, animal crackers, cereal, fruit snacks, bananas. Those are incredible, quick carbohydrates to have and then hour before training. And every athlete's going to be different. You know, when I'm working with athletes, I'm one, helping them train their gut to be able to eat that close to practice, but two, helping them figure out what food works for them when. So that banana might be best at 45 minutes. And then, they could do fruit snacks or an applesauce at 15 minutes before. It's really just about finding what works best for your body and your gut.
That makes a lot of sense. And I feel like it's one of the things that you work with your athletes is almost, kind of training and experimenting and then reflecting on how
Yeah.
certain foods affect you when, let's say if it's a baseball game or it's a basketball game and how much time, like how much do you like encourage athletes to kind of like be reflective on what food affects you at what time?
Oh, that is what we do every session when I'm working with athletes is, I want to know we're creating this fueling guide and I call it, it's never a one size fits all fueling guide, right? Every athlete, it's a blank slate and we're building it together because you're all different humans and you have different training loads and different goals. And so that's exactly what we do every session is we take that previous fueling guide that we made from maybe a week or two before and we adapt it. And so I have some athletes who will say, listen, like I am starving after lunch. Like, and so it's, do we make lunch bigger? Was lunch not big enough? Do we have to sneak a snack in? Do we need more protein? Like, can we adapt this in a way so that you have more fuel? Or have other athletes who say, they're going to bed and they are just so hungry. Or the opposite, they're really, really full and they can't go to sleep. So how do we more evenly spread out that fuel, say earlier in the day for them? So it really is kind of a design, reflect, adapt kind of program. And, I encourage my athletes every session. I say, what was a win this week? What went really well, performance wise and nutrition wise? And what was a challenge for performance and nutrition? And how can we work on both of those in terms of your hydration and your fueling plan?
I love that. Helping them, kind of design it and then, hey, we'll reflect and then we're just going to reassess what we
Yeah.
need to and what adjustments we need to make. And I know that one of the things that's really important when it comes to nutrition is also sleep, right? Because I know personally when I don't
Yes.
get enough sleep, I'm hungrier and I want to eat more, right? Because I am lacking energy, right? And so I'm trying to make up with my lack of energy with eating more, trying to eat more energy. Can you talk about the importance of sleep when it comes to nutrition?
Yeah, sleep is the time when your body does all its kind of rebuilding and repairing. So, when it comes to sleep, one, you have to make sure that you're fueled going into sleep because you have to have all those nutrients for your body to pull on to repair muscle and strengthen bones and joints. But it's also an opportunity for your body to supercharge your muscles with those carbohydrates and pack them away in your muscles as glycogen for the next day's practice. So sleep is that restorative period, and often I hear athletes, most of my athletes are training late at night, so they get home at 9:30, 10. Quick shower, quick meal maybe, and then they're going to bed. And what we work on is how do we maybe have or have a dinner, or dinner, I call it dinner part one before training, and then after training have a strong snack or dinner part two, so you don't feel like you're stuffed before bed, but you're also not starving at practice. It's finding that good balance that really works for you that supports your sleep, because you shouldn't be starving going to bed, but you shouldn't be really stuffed either.
Yeah. No, I know. I've definitely been on both ends, right? Where I'm like
Yeah.
hungry before bed, and then also like when I'm stuffed before bed, that does not help at all, after
Yeah.
Thanksgiving or whenever it may be, right? So I think that's really interesting. And I'd love for you to kind of expand on, I think I am in the camp and department that I believe sleep is great for you, right? Whatever
Yeah.
that those hours are, 7 to 8. And so I think obviously there's the miss of, Kobe Bryant, he wakes up at 4 a.m. and gets up and, goes, but then he's only getting 4 or 5 hours in. A lot of bodies need more time to, like you talked about, sleep is that time to recover, right?
Yeah.
And recovery is so important because I honestly feel like these athletes today train more than, at least sports specific, than any other athletes of any other generation, just because they have so many more opportunities, which is great.
Yes.
But that means that sleep is even more necessary.
That's exactly right. It's that time when they're repairing, and especially younger athletes like middle school, high school, college, your brain is still growing and developing. That's that time when you're recovering and you're rebuilding and your hormones are resetting, and it's important that you find that balance and you give yourself that time. It's a big part of self-care. giving yourself the time to sleep and also giving your time, I call it wind down time before bed. And I work on this a lot, especially with my athletes who are staying up late studying or training late. It's hard to just shut off and go to bed. You can't just shut your
Okay.
brain off and
Yeah.
jump into the bed. So we
Right.
talk about like, can we do 30 minutes to an hour of like wind down time where, you're showering, you're stretching, you have some hydration, you're trying to stay away from technology as most as you best you can. Maybe you're reading a book, like nothing studying wise, right? You're just trying to wind down your brain, journaling, whatever it may be. Every athlete's a bit different, but we're creating this, 3 to 4 step routine before bed to help ease into bed, reduce that stress so they are able to get that restful night's sleep, which just helps them all around focus better the next day, be stronger, have more energy, all of this really positive stuff.
Right. And I think one of the things I'd love to expand on and continue our conversation about is something you just brought up when it comes to technology. Technology is not going away. I don't think it's ever like, never going to tell an athlete like, don't be on social media and
Yeah.
don't, it's just a part of our life now. But, now that we're kind of on the topic of recovery, I also think, especially for this generation of athletes, right, as it is interwoven into their lives, a lot of them will take, certain pieces of media and compare themselves to the other athletes, right? And when we talk about nutrition, a lot of times it becomes body size, right? This person can
Mhm.
dunk, or this person is looks shredded and looks like they can, bench press 300 pounds, or whatever their comparisons are. I'm curious how you, if you, have conversations with your athletes when it comes to comparison with technology and social media.
Oh, all the time. All of the time we are talking about this, especially because, a lot of my athletes they may have disordered eating and eating disorder, body image challenges. Like you said, just comparing yourself to other athletes, whether it be on social media or teammates or professionals. And so I talk about this with them all the time. And one of my best recommendations when it comes to social media is one, recognizing that there are so many filters out there that can
Mm,
tone and tan and shrink and grow and do all these different things. So just keeping that in mind as you're looking at social media. But then often I challenge my athletes, whether it's in session with me or as homework kind of between session, is, if you're scrolling through and you see someone who kind of makes you second guess yourself or question yourself and doesn't make you a better human, unfollow. You do not need them in your life, and sometimes I'll say like unfollow 5 people this week who are triggering to you, or even if it's not a significant trigger, but it's something where you're like, oh, I wish I looked like that, or I wish I did. That's negative. You don't need that negativity in your life. Like, you are powerful how you are. And so, taking that stress out can be helpful. Not leaving social media, but you can definitely manipulate what you see.
that makes a lot of sense. And, kind of as you talk about that, I'm curious, how you approach people's self-talk, because I think a lot of things, and I'm sure a lot of your athletes have shared, obviously, certain confidential information, but in terms of like
Yeah.
how they view themselves and the way that they talk about themselves in a way that's just not positive, not productive. And I'm curious how you kind of expand on a conversation, help them and help invite them to, reflect in a more healthy way, have a little bit more positive self-talk,
Yeah.
and of course nutrition. But like we talked about at the very beginning, right, it's just one component into this overall well-being of health.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought this up because this is something I do all the time in session. It's not just nutrition, it's how everything's impacting your life, your food, your body. And so, if someone's having a negative body image day or they're, picking themselves apart, like my thighs, my core, I don't love this, I have an athlete the other day, she's like, oh, I'm fluffy, so we take that word and we put it on paper. I'm like, write it down right now, write it out. And, if we're a virtual session, I'll type it out for them when we're looking at it. Or if, we're in person, we have them write it out. And then now it's what's the positive of that? How can we start changing that brain map and that neuron wave to say something positive about yourself? So instead of, oh, my thighs are so big, no, my thighs are powerful because they allow me to kick the ball or run up the hill or outrun my opponent or, take a step ahead. Changing that brainwave and changing, it takes time, and it's an exercise I do over and over and over again with my athletes. But over time, that brainwave changes and they are more confident and they, take a step away from being that negative voice in their own head, and that positive voice really starts to take over, especially when you write it out. When you slow down that brain of like kind of those negative thoughts
Right.
and give it a break, write it out, slow it down, that thought will change.
Yeah, that's really big. And can you kind of expand on how you, potentially facilitate that exercise for the parents and coaches that are listening for their athletes?
Yeah. So something I'll do is, if a negative thought comes up within my sessions, or even if my clients are messaging me between, I'll say, let's write it out. Like, so physically, I call it my post-it note challenge for them. So I'd say, like, carry post-it note with you if you're at home, or if you're on your phone, just put it in your notes, but write down that negative thought that keeps coming up so we can kind of nip it in the bud. And then during session, and then eventually they're doing it on their own, but together we're saying, what is that positive redirection of that? Like, it could be negative, but how do we redirect it to be something positive? So, like I mentioned, the body image thing, we're pointing out, like, oh, my thighs are too big, or my arms aren't big enough, or my shoulder, or small, or too small. Still honoring and saying, well, what are you achieving with your body? Because you're doing something powerful every day, just existing. Or I have some athletes, in the eating disorder realm, who will say, like, oh, I can't have this cake or this ice cream or this pizza or whatever it may be. And it's, no, you can have it because you're creating memories with family, or you're celebrating with teams, or you're just enjoying that food. Like, it doesn't have to be a can't. It can be a positive thing, because food is so much more than fuel. It's memories, it's connection, it's fun. There's so much that goes into it.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up because I think that's a really important part that a lot of, people are challenged with. I mean, for those that are listening, for you, like I used to be 50 pounds heavier when I was in, college. And so when I was trying to lose that weight is like, I never want to have this pizza and I never want to, have this ice cream or whatever it may be. And when I like, after I finished, just I guess sharing with the audience is like, I was just like binge eat for like 30 minutes straight, and like I could not stop myself like after I like had lost the weight because I had like so much constricted myself like never to have that like when I had the chance like I overate. And I'm sure you've seen this quite a bit in terms of your work. And so I really could you expand a little bit more on your kind of principle and thoughts around it's okay to eat ice cream when you're with the family, and pizza when it's a team gathering, and a turkey leg and mashed potatoes on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, yeah. So it goes back to, like, my pillars. So we talked about the four fuel method, and my first two pillars are fuel, which is what you eat, finesse, which is when you eat. The third pillar is fluids, or hydration. And the last one is fun. And it's just creating a meal plan that you truly enjoy. And a lot of my athletes love that part, because it's not just all like, you have to eat this protein and carb and this. It's, you should be able to have fun and have flexibility within your day. And if you want dessert, have it. If you want pizza, have it. Whatever it may be, it's honestly will probably help your game in some way, especially for those underfueled athletes, or athletes who are trying to gain muscle. Having that little bit of extra fuel from pizza or ice cream or chips here and there can be beneficial. And it makes it fun. It makes it enjoyable. I mean, if adding chips to a sandwich, or, having pizza every now and then makes you look forward to meals, like, go for it, have fun. Because life is only so long. And, I don't want you to look back at your teens or 20s or 30s or 40s or whatever age and be like, oh man, I really missed out on connecting with friends or connecting with families, because I wouldn't allow myself to have that certain thing.
That's really interesting when you talk about that connection piece, because that is something that's really important to me, right? Is that
Mhm.
connection. And I'm a big believer in like the power of sharing a meal, and that,
Yes.
obviously I feel like sometimes people will maybe not want to, show up like, oh, I don't want to be there because I'm going to eat, pizza or a burger, so I'm just going to remove myself and not have this opportunity to potentially connect with my friends and make memories that,
Mhm.
we won't be able to get back. And I think that's one of the most important, aspects of being on a team, right? Like at the end of the day, only 7% of high school athletes play collegiate athletes. And I'm sure the number of collegiate athletes playing professional are even more limited. So it's all
Mhm.
about maximizing that time when we do get the opportunity to, be with a team and share a meal.
Yeah, exactly. When you train with them every day, they become friends, and then they eventually become family, and, now lifelong friends. Many of my friends are from, the athletic world when I was younger. So it's a great opportunity to create connection. And, as humans, we're social. And so isolating yourself only makes things worse.
Absolutely. And I know that one of the things that in terms of my limited research, I know that one of the most important ways, besides talking about nutrition and sleep for recovery, is actually to have fun and spend time with people.
Yes.
And it's kind of interesting, right? That sometimes it feels like we need to be this, what is potentially celebrated in the media is, the Kobe Bryant, the lone wolf, that just goes at 4 a.m. and, you know, always by himself, lacks sleep, but that's not actually recovering your body to the fullest
Yeah.
ability. So I think it's always kind of interesting to think about the multitude of ways that we can recover.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's just, again, that whole human impact.
So with a whole human impact, the one, principle we haven't kind of touched on yet is fluids. So I'd love to, talk a little bit around on fluids, a lot of water, right? Is Gatorade even healthy, right? Like where do we start with, kind of how we should, kind of fuel our body with fluids?
Yeah. So when it comes to fluids, I always use the word fluid instead of water because all fluids count towards that end goal. Like, yes, water should be the foundation. We should be drinking nice, sipping on water as we speak. We should definitely, have a foundation of water throughout the day. But things like chocolate milk after practice for your recovery fuel counts towards fluids. Fruits and vegetables, lemonade, juice as your pre-workout snack, count towards your overall fluids. And so, really thinking about, it doesn't have to just be water. I had a client earlier today who was really struggling to get in water, and we always look at a couple of things. One, do you have the kind of water bottle that opens up you to drinking water? And what I mean by that is it easily opened? I always recommend one with a straw because by nature, having to do more work, we're not going to do it. So if you have to twist the cap off, you're probably not going to drink water. But if you have a straw, you just flip up, you will drink a lot more water. So just little things like that, putting it on your desk at school, pulling it out of your backpack, making sure it's a bright color, or something eye catching is really, really important because you'll see it more if it's black or silver. It'll just blend into your background. But if it's really bright and vibrant, you'll see it a little bit more. Will encourage you to drink more water. So water should really be that foundation. And then we're just adding in different things. Like I mentioned, chocolate milk is the perfect recovery fuel for athletes because it has the hydration piece, it has carbohydrates, it has protein with the bonus of calcium and vitamin D. So some really good stuff there. You can use smoothies as meals, add in some hydration, or even as recovery fuel or pre-workout fuel, depending on what's in them. So there's just so much opportunity when it comes to hydration to think outside the box. And that's really that key there. We want to avoid dehydration. Even just a little bit of dehydration can significantly impact an athlete's game, their reaction time, their strength, their endurance, their performance, all of that. So we want to make sure that we're pre-hydrating, hydrating during, and then doing that recovery hydration after.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Are there certain drinks though that hydrate athletes in a more, or just people in a more efficient way than others?
Yeah. So the hydration formula, it's not just water, right? So water is the big piece of it, but then you have two other pieces. So it's water, carbohydrates, and electrolytes, primarily sodium. So that carbohydrate helps your body to absorb and hold on to that water. And the electrolytes, especially sodium, helps your body kind of move it around and put it where it needs to be. And so you need all three to stay hydrated. I have a lot of athletes who say, I'm drinking water, but I'm still thirsty. That's because you don't have that carb or, you don't have that carb or electrolyte to help your body hold on to that water. It's kind of going right through you. So it's important that, you're really checking in with yourself and saying, do I have everything I need? So yeah, there are some things that are more hydrating. Like you mentioned, like sports drinks, like Gatorade, Powerade, they are that go-to hydration for many teams because they have that carbohydrate, they have the electrolyte, and they have the fluid, obviously, that you need to stay hydrated. A lot of athletes will fear the sugar in a sports drink or something like that. That is the carb you need. That is that simple sugar that you need to train and perform. If you were going to have a whole bunch of, complex carbs, a lot of fiber, your body you'd be nauseous. It wouldn't feel good, right? So that simple carb, that easily digested carb is exactly what you need right before or during training.
That's really interesting. So there's certain sugars that we should, kind of avoid, right? Because I mean, obviously, I know, right? A lot of people like it's still kind of thinking about what we talked about earlier in terms of like the zero sugar, right? When it comes to our approach in terms of our nutrition. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just curious, for some of my athletes, because I know I have some athletes who are like, no, I don't want that. Because I'll actually bring up a funny story. So I gave out like it's a Costco Gatorade. It's like the Kirkland sports drink.
Sure. Yeah.
Like the impact player of the day. I gave that out, and one of my players didn't want it because he's like, I don't want the sugar, coach.
Yeah.
So are there certain sugars that are better, or like certain sports drinks that are better, or is it kind of depend?
Yeah, there are so many different types of sports drinks out there, and the
Right.
key is looking for, the Gatorade, Powerades, like they're formulated to have the sugars in there that are best absorbed. So we're looking at like glucose, things that are easily absorbed by your body. That's what we want. Like I mentioned, we don't want those complex carbs that have a lot of fiber during practice. It won't feel good to have that sort of stuff. So that simple sugar is really what we want. And you can do things like honey or honey pouches, honey stinger, bonk breakers. Those are all great brands that have, instead of drinking it, you can have that sort of gummy or power sport fuel with water. I also have some athletes who don't want to use the sport fuel. And so we do things like coconut water with a pinch of salt and orange juice, and then have their water on the side. So we do like a homemade sports drink in that way. And so there's a lot of ways you can get creative. I work with a lot of families who, some don't want the processed food, some don't want the food dye. It doesn't matter to me what kind of family philosophy you guys have in terms of nutrition. I'm willing to work with you and really help you create a plan. As long as you're fueled and energized, that is what matters the most to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Fuel and energy. And I think it's really kind of interesting that, there are different creative ways that you can get those, simple sugars in hydration and fuel and just overall health and nutrition. And I know we talked a lot about for the athletes, but for the parents and coaches that are listening, I think it's, really important for them to have great nutrition as well. And a lot of times, they're busy, right? Especially for the parents that are dropping kids off here, then they pick the other kid up here after work, and then, they're trying to cram things in. So for the busy coach, busy parent, can you, talk a little bit more about, the importance it is for them to, be a healthy individual, right? We talked about a little bit more than nutrition, talking about sleep and health, but why it's so important for them also to, follow some of these, principles that we touched on, about for our athletes.
Yeah, I think my biggest advice is your athletes are watching you more than you think they are.
Yeah.
In terms of your choices, what you say about food, how you train, how you refer to training. And, an example would be, I had pretty much every season, I'll get a message or two from a concerned parent or an athlete who will say, well, coach said this was bad. Coach says I can't do this. I can't do that. I shouldn't have sugar. And every year, every season, I do an Instagram post. It's a letter to coaches, saying
Yeah.
like, please don't tell your kids no. Like they can't have sugar, they can't have this, they can't have that. Like encourage them to add in protein, add in carbs, add in fruits and vegetables, to drink more water. Encourage them to do things versus not, because you'll have more impact that way, and a more positive impact on their body image, their choices, and that sort of stuff. And when it comes to training, like you kind of mentioned, like making it fun and making the sport fun, so we don't all burn out by the time we're 18 and that sort of stuff, and they have that opportunity to keep playing. And then just giving them, that, you're an open ear, really. So they have questions about nutrition. You don't say things are good or bad, like you're open, or reach out to someone, a sports dietitian, or send me a DM or something like that, and just open that conversation up, because that's really what it's about. It's just communicating in a positive way. And that's my best advice for coaches and parents is, don't label foods as good and bad, label them as, this one's very fueling. You want this one before practice, this one's after practice. Like you wouldn't have a milkshake right before practice, pretty nauseating, but after practice is some recovery fuel or some fun fuel, like go for it. So just making food neutral and really having fun with it.
I love that you talked about having fun with it. And I think, just to double down on your point and kind of how I view coaching high school athletes, middle school, elementary athletes, right? I still have a positive relationship, right, with
Yeah.
working out and with, eating pretty generally healthy. Have had my little, battles with college, but I think that's just anyone who's going through their own independence. And I still play basketball to this day because I have a positive relationship with sports from when I was younger. And so I hope that I can pass that on to this generation so that they can remain healthy and active, engaged community members, as they graduate and go beyond basketball. So,
Yeah.
you talked about, potentially having them reach out to you, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your website, Instagram, or how people can connect with you, because you brought so much value, and how anyone could potentially work with you as well.
Yeah, so I am most active on Instagram. So it's highschool.athlete.nutrition. And I'm pretty much there every day answering questions, sharing content. So you can always kind of reach out that way. Or on my Instagram, I have a link to my website, which is smnutritionrd.com. And on my website, you can find a lot of different resources, from my online course to scheduling a free discovery call to work with me one-on-one. And that's always my recommendation. If you want to learn more about working with me, or really just have questions about, the Academy, which is my online course, or anything like that, just schedule a discovery call. I'm happy to chat with you, learn about your goals, challenges, and kind of figure out how we can best work together to help you reach your ultimate goal of just improving your performance and fueling plan.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time today, Stephanie. I really appreciate you sharing all this wisdom, and I have some things that I'm taking away from myself as well. So that's always great. Appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.